The clatter of silverware was drowned out by the hush that fell across the dining room of the Magnolia Grill, a midtown steakhouse where the wealthy came to eat under low golden lights and polished oak beams. It was Friday night, every table booked. The kind of evening when the servers moved like dancers on a stage, swift, precise, invisible, unless needed. But in the far corner booth, a storm was brewing. "Excuse me." The man's voice cut through the hum of conversation, like the crack of a whip. Heads turned. Forks paused midair. He was dressed in a charcoal suit, so sharp it seemed to slice through the light. A gold watch flashing at his wrist with every dismissive gesture. His name was Richard Calloway, a billionaire investor known across the city for his real estate empire and short temper. People whispered his name like a warning. Tonight, he was the kind of guest no server wanted, yet everyone was forced to serve. And standing in front of him, tray balanced in steady hands, was Sophia Miller. Sophia had worked at the Magnolia for almost 3 years. She was known for her calm under pressure, the way she could handle rowdy bachelor parties, entitled executives, even families who let their kids treat the booth like a jungle gym. She was the one who never raised her voice, never lost her cool. But tonight, the billionaire had decided to test her patience. "I asked for the steak medium rare," Calloway barked, pointing at the perfectly seared cut resting on his plate. "This is overcooked. Do you people even know what you're doing back there?" Sophia glanced at the steak. The truth was plain. It was medium rare, a flawless pink in the center. But she also knew what kind of man sat before her. Someone used to winning battles by sheer force of ego. She took a quiet breath. "Sir, I can have the kitchen prepare another one if you'd like. But this one is cooked exactly medium rare." The table gasped, not the other guests, but his entourage. 3 suited men who had sat silently up until now exchanged wary glances. Everyone in this town knew that contradicting Richard Calloway was like stepping in front of a moving train. His eyes narrowed. "Are you calling me a liar?" Sophia held her ground, though her pulse hammered. "No, sir. I'm just saying, our chef made it to the temperature you ordered, but I'll replace it if you'd like." Silence stretched across the room, heavy as thunder. Then, Calloway's lips curled into something halfway between a smile and a sneer. "You've got some nerve, sweetheart," he said, his voice low but carrying across the room. "People like you don't talk back to people like me." The words landed like a slap. Sophia felt them in her chest. People like you. Just a waitress. Just another pair of hands serving food. Invisible unless she made a mistake. Something inside her stirred. Something tired of being invisible. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She simply said, "I treat everyone the same, sir. No exceptions." Gasps rippled. Somewhere near the bar, someone whispered, "Oh my God." Calloway's face darkened. He snapped his fingers, summoning the restaurant manager like a king calling for his guard. Within minutes, Sophia was pulled aside, her apron stripped. Her shift ended before her tray had even cooled in her hand. "You're done here," the manager muttered, avoiding her eyes. "You can pick up your last check next week." And just like that, Sophia Miller walked out of the Magnolia Grill into the cool night air, unemployed for daring to stand her ground. The door shut behind her with a final, echoing thud. But this wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning. Because sometimes, the quietest voices carry the loudest truths. And sometimes, even the smallest act of courage can unravel a giant. Stay with this story. What happened next turned a simple steakhouse dispute into a showdown that shook the city and proved that dignity is worth more than money. Sophia Miller wasn't born with much, but she carried herself like she had something no one could take away, dignity. At 27, she had already seen her share of hard times. She grew up in a small town outside Nashville, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on. Sophia had been the kind of kid who stayed late after school to clean up the chalkboards, who babysat for neighbors to buy her prom dress, who knew the value of $1 before she ever held one in her hand. By the time she moved to the city, she'd learned one thing. The world often judged you by your uniform. When she tied her apron and tucked her notepad into her pocket, people didn't see the books she read at night or the art projects she painted on her days off. They didn't see her resilience or her dreams of finishing school. They just saw the waitress. And most nights, Sophia let that roll off her back. She smiled when people were rude. She apologized when they were unreasonable. She worked fast, remembered details, and took pride in making people feel welcome. But there was a line, a thin one, maybe invisible to most, that she refused to let anyone cross. Richard Calloway didn't see lines. He was 61, twice divorced, and as well fed on power as he was on steak dinners. Money had turned him into a man who mistook fear for respect. His photo was in magazines, his name in headlines. But those who knew him best whispered about his cruelty when cameras weren't around. He believed his wealth gave him the right to humiliate, to command, to treat others as less than him. And if someone pushed back, he crushed them, because that was his sport. The night at the Magnolia, Calloway wasn't alone. His entourage sat like shadows around him. 3 men in tailored suits. Employees who nodded at everything he said, laughed at every cruel joke, and kept their mouths shut when he snapped at the staff. They weren't villains. Not exactly. They were men who had traded their spines for paychecks, who believed silence kept them safe. And then there was Maya, another server who had worked alongside Sophia for years. Maya had been in the back when the confrontation erupted, but she'd heard the commotion and seen Sophia let out. Maya's heart sank, but she said nothing. She needed the job. She had 2 kids at home. She whispered to another server, Sophia shouldn't have talked back. But the truth was plain on her face. She admired her friend's courage. That's how it went most of the time. People saw unfairness, but they looked the other way. The system worked that way. The customer was always right, even when they were wrong. The rich had the power, and the rest were supposed to bow their heads. But Sophia wasn't built to bow. Not forever. And Calloway, so used to obedience, had no idea that the waitress he fired that night would be the one to challenge him in a way money couldn't fix. The morning after, Sophia woke to silence. No alarm clock. No reason to throw on her black work pants and race to the bus stop. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator in her 1-bedroom apartment. And the heaviness of being unemployed. Her apron still lay folded on the chair by the door. The one she dropped there after leaving the Magnolia in shock. She stared at it for a long time. To anyone else, it was just cloth. To her, it represented 3 years of late nights, double shifts, and rent checks paid on time. Losing it wasn't just about money. It was about being stripped of something she had earned. The humiliation clung to her skin like smoke. She replayed Calloway's words again and again. People like you don't talk back to people like me. It wasn't just an insult. It was a sentence. As though her worth had already been decided by the uniform she wore. Meanwhile, across town, Richard Calloway was seated in the corner office of his skyscraper, telling the story like it was a joke. You should have seen her face, he boomed, laughing to his assistant and 2 of his executives. This waitress thought she could stand there and tell me what's what. Fired on the spot. That's how you deal with people who don't know their place. His audience chuckled politely, though uneasily. One of them, a junior associate barely a year into the job, shifted in his seat. He had waited tables once too, before grad school. He remembered the sting of being dismissed. But he kept quiet. You didn't interrupt Richard Calloway when he was on a roll. Calloway leaned back, satisfied, swirling the bourbon in his glass. Though it wasn't yet noon. These people think respect is free. They forget it's something you earn. But the truth was, Richard didn't respect anyone. Not really. Back at the Magnolia, the fallout was immediate. The staff whispered about Sophia's firing in the kitchen, voices low, eyes darting toward the manager's office. Everyone knew she hadn't been in the wrong, but no one dared to say it out loud. The motto was unspoken, but clear. The customer is always right, especially when the customer could buy the whole restaurant twice over. Maya felt the weight of it hardest. She thought of Sophia standing tall, refusing to shrink in front of Calloway. Part of her wanted to cheer. Another part reminded her that bills were due in 5 days. So, she stayed quiet. Just like everyone else. That night, word of the confrontation spread beyond the restaurant. A couple of diners who had witnessed it told their friends. A blurry cell phone clip surfaced online, just enough to catch Calloway's sharp tone and Sophia's steady voice saying, I treat everyone the same. No exceptions. It didn't go viral, not yet. But it simmered. For Sophia, the deeper wound wasn't losing her paycheck. It was losing her voice. She thought of her mother, who had once worked as a cashier in a grocery store and come home in tears after being yelled at by a customer. Her mother had told her, sometimes you have to swallow it, Sophia. Just keep your head down. Sophia had swallowed enough in her life. But still, the fear pressed in. Rent. Groceries. gas for her old Honda. The job market wasn't kind to people without a degree, and she couldn't afford weeks of unemployment. She sat at her tiny kitchen table, staring at the bills spread out like a losing hand of cards. A voice inside whispered, "Maybe you should have just said sorry. Maybe you should have kept quiet." But another voice, quieter, steadier, rose to meet it. "No, you weren't wrong. And sometimes, being right is the only thing you have left." She didn't know what she would do yet, but something in her bones told her this wasn't over. Because deep down, beneath the black uniform and polite smile, Sophia Miller was not just a waitress. She was something Calloway didn't expect, and sooner or later, he was going to find out. Sophia sat at her small kitchen table, unpaid bills staring back at her. Like silent judges, she shuffled them into a pile, then pushed them aside. Her hand lingered on an old notebook that sat in the corner, worn leather cover, pages filled with neat handwriting. She hadn't opened it in months. It wasn't a server's handbook or a list of recipes. It was her law textbook. She traced her fingers across the spine, memories surfacing like photographs from a box long buried. There was a time, not too long ago, when Sophia Miller wasn't supposed to be a waitress at all. She had dreamed of becoming a lawyer. She had been accepted into state university with a partial scholarship. For 2 years, she worked days at the library and nights tutoring other students, keeping her grades high enough to make the dean's list. But life had a way of demanding sacrifice. When her mother got sick, Sophia left school to come home, pick up shifts, and pay for the prescriptions insurance wouldn't cover. One semester turned into another, and before long, the dream slipped out of reach. She promised herself she'd go back one day, when the time was right. Still, the lessons never left her. She remembered her professor, Dr. Whitman, pacing the lecture hall, his voice firm but kind. Law isn't about power, it's about protection. It's the shield the ordinary person holds up against giants. Sophia had believed that once. She had believed she could be one of the people who made the shield stronger. She closed her eyes and remembered long nights in the library. Highlighted pages on contracts, employment rights, case studies about workers who fought back against corporations and won. She had once written a paper on workplace discrimination. That earned her top marks. She had even toyed with applying for an internship at a local law firm. Before her mother's diagnosis changed everything. Now, years later, that knowledge sat quietly in the corners of her mind, like a tool she hadn't picked up in far too long. And as she replayed Calloway's sneer, "People like you don't talk back to people like me," something clicked. He wasn't just insulting her pride. He was crossing a line. A faint smile touched her lips. Not because she had a plan yet, but because she knew one thing with certainty. Richard Calloway thought she was just a waitress. He had no idea who she really was, or what she still carried inside her. She slid the notebook back under the bills, but the spark inside her didn't dim. It was only growing brighter. The following Friday night, the Magnolia Grill buzzed with its usual crowd of polished shoes, glittering jewelry, and expensive cologne. Every booth was full, every glass polished to a gleam. The staff moved nervously, though. Word had gotten around that Richard Calloway was coming back. And when Richard Calloway arrived, he made sure everyone knew it. His presence filled the room before he even sat down. He strode in with his entourage, head high, chest out, as though the restaurant itself belonged to him. People turned their heads, some out of admiration, some out of fear. Calloway thrived on that. He liked knowing that wherever he went, he was the center of gravity. He slid into the same corner booth as last time, his gold watch catching the glow of the chandelier. The server assigned to him tonight, Maya, trembled as she approached. She remembered what happened last week. She didn't want to be next. Calloway smirked at her unease. "Relax, sweetheart. Just don't screw up like your friend did." His words were loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. Laughter followed from his table, sharp and cruel. The humiliation was meant to linger in the air like smoke. But then the front doors opened, and in walked Sophia Miller. Heads turned. Forks froze. She wasn't in her uniform. Tonight, she wore a tailored blazer, dark jeans, and a quiet confidence that seemed to add inches to her height. At her side walked a woman in a sharp navy suit, attorney Rachel Dunn, a well-known employment lawyer in the city. The manager nearly dropped a tray when he saw them. "Sophia, what are you doing here?" Sophia's voice was calm, steady. "I came to clear something up." She walked past the bar, past the rows of staring guests, until she stopped at Calloway's booth. His smirk faltered, just for a second, before it returned sharper than ever. "Well, look who it is," he drawled. "The waitress who thought she could play lawyer. What's this? Your attempt at revenge?" Sophia leaned slightly forward, her eyes never leaving his. "No, Mr. Calloway. Not revenge. Accountability." The word hung in the air. Rachel Dunn stepped forward, sliding a folder onto the table in front of him. "We're here regarding the events of last Friday evening. The unlawful termination of my client. The verbal harassment. The public humiliation." Calloway's laugh was short, barking. "Harassment? Termination? She was a server. She mouthed off and lost her job. That's not unlawful. That's life." Sophia's voice cut clean through his arrogance. "Actually, it's not. I studied employment law before I came here, and I remember the statutes. You targeted me, not because of performance, but because I refused to let you demean me. That's retaliation, Mr. Calloway. And retaliation is illegal." Gasps rippled across the dining room. Guests leaned in, whispers rising. Maya froze with a tray in her hands, staring at her friend with awe. Calloway's smile wavered. "You don't know what you're talking about." Rachel opened the folder. "We have witnesses. Video evidence. Multiple employees ready to testify that." Mr. Calloway's remarks crossed the line into discriminatory behavior. "Should we proceed in court, your name will be tied to harassment and workplace retaliation. The press will have a field day." The billionaire shifted in his seat. For the first time, he looked small against the leather booth. Sophia stood tall, her voice unwavering. "You thought I was just a waitress. You thought you could silence me. But I know my rights. And I'm not alone anymore." The restaurant was silent, every pair of eyes fixed on her. Calloway opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. His entourage looked away, ashamed, unwilling to back him this time. He reached for his glass, but his hand shook just enough for the ice to clink against the rim. Rachel leaned in, her voice firm. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to issue a public apology. You're going to settle, generously, to make this right. Or we take this to court, where your empire will be dragged into the spotlight." Silence. Then, the sound of Calloway swallowing hard. For once, he had no clever retort, no cruel remark. He was cornered by the very woman he had dismissed as invisible. Sophia didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply held her ground, her quiet strength louder than any insult he had thrown. Around the room, the staff began to smile. Maya let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. A couple at a nearby table even clapped softly before others joined in. The sound grew, not raucous but steady, a wave of support rolling through the restaurant. And in that moment, the balance shifted. The giant was humbled. The waitress was seen, and nothing would ever be the same again. The applause inside the Magnolia Grill didn't roar like a stadium. It rose gently, like the steady build of a tide, low at first, then undeniable. People clapped not just for Sophia, but for the truth of what she represented. The staff who had stood frozen only moments before now straightened. Shoulders lifted as if they'd each been given permission to breathe. Maya set down her tray and joined the applause, her eyes shining. Even the busboys in the corner clapped, their hands red from work but alive with pride. Richard Calloway sat stiff in the booth, his face blotched crimson. For a man used to controlling every room, the loss of power was suffocating. His entourage stared at the table, unwilling to meet his eye, their loyalty evaporating with the heat of public disgrace. Rachel Dunn closed the folder in front of him with a soft but final snap. "We'll be in touch with your legal team," she said calmly. "I suggest you cooperate. The alternative won't be kind." Sophia didn't add anything more. She didn't need to. Her silence was heavier than any insult, her presence stronger than his threats. She turned and walked back toward the front doors, the applause following her like a wave. Outside, under the glow of the restaurant sign, she exhaled. The night air smelled of rain and possibility. Rachel placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did more than stand up for yourself tonight," she said. "You reminded everyone in there they deserve dignity too." For the first time in days, Sophia allowed herself to smile. The fallout came fast. By Monday morning, whispers had spread through the city. The cell phone video from that night was clearer, this time capturing not just Calloway's arrogance, but Sophia's steady voice cutting through it with the weight of truth. News outlets picked it up. Headlines read, "Billionaire humiliated after waitress stands up for herself." Clips aired on local television, replaying her words. I treat everyone the same. No exceptions. What had been meant as a dismissal became a rallying cry. At the Magnolia, something shifted. Staff who once felt invisible found courage in the memory of that night. The manager, who had once looked away, apologized to Sophia through a trembling phone call. I should have defended you, he admitted. I was wrong. And in an unexpected twist, Rachel Dunn offered Sophia more than representation. She offered her a chance. You've got the instincts, Rachel told her over coffee one afternoon. The way you stood up to him, the way you remembered the law. You belong in this field. My firm takes interns every year. If you want it. The door's open. Sophia's heart raced. It wasn't the full dream, not yet, but it was the first step back toward the life she thought she'd lost. For Richard Calloway, the consequences weren't measured in jail time or lost millions. They were measured in something he valued more. Reputation. Investors grew wary. Business partners stopped returning his calls. Articles questioned his pattern of behavior, digging up stories of past outbursts, piecing together the truth he had kept buried under wealth. His name, once sharp with power, became heavy with disgrace. And though he tried to brush it off with more arrogance, deep down, the memory of that night clung to him. He had been bested not by another billionaire, not by a competitor, but by the woman he thought was beneath him. A waitress. It was a humiliation money couldn't erase. Weeks later, Sophia walked back into the Magnolia, not as an employee, but as a guest. She wore her blazer, her hair loose around her shoulders. Maya rushed over, grinning, and pulled her into a hug. You changed everything here, Maya whispered. It feels different now, like we don't have to keep our heads down anymore. Sophia glanced around at the faces of her former co-workers. They looked brighter, lighter, as if her courage had spread, like sunlight through the cracks. She realized then that what she had done wasn't just for herself. It was for every person who had ever been told they were just something, just a server, just a worker, just a voice not worth hearing. She lifted her glass when Maya poured her water. To standing tall, she said softly. Maya smiled. To never bowing again. The clink of their glasses was small, but it echoed louder than any applause. And in that moment, Sophia Miller knew. She hadn't just gotten her dignity back. She had built something bigger. A future. A reminder. A spark that could not be put out. Because sometimes, the smallest act of courage can bring the mightiest to their knees. 2 years later, Sophia Miller no longer wore an apron. She sat behind a desk stacked with case files. Sunlight streaming through the window of Rachel Dunn's law office. On the wall hung her framed certificate. Proof. She had completed her paralegal program. She wasn't finished yet. Law school was still in her sights. But she was on the path. And every day she fought for people who once felt as voiceless as she had. She had built a reputation for listening, for standing beside workers who had been wrongfully fired, harassed, or silenced. Clients came in beaten down and left with their heads higher. Sophia knew that feeling. She had lived it. And that made her fight twice as hard. Sometimes, she still thought of the Magnolia. She visited often. Now as a customer. The staff greeted her like family. And the place felt lighter than before. Maya eventually became a shift supervisor, her voice louder, her steps firmer. Sophia realized she had left behind not just memories, but a ripple of courage that continued to grow. And Richard Calloway? His empire had never fully recovered. Investors distanced themselves. His name appeared in headlines only as a cautionary tale. At charity galas where he once commanded the room, he was now barely noticed. His downfall wasn't sudden, it was slow, quiet. The steady erosion of a man who built his house on arrogance. Sophia, on the other hand, had built hers on dignity. And dignity, once claimed, can't be taken back. As she packed her briefcase one evening, she paused to look at a sticky note on her desk. 3 words were written in bold ink, stand tall always. A reminder of the night she refused to bow. Because the truth was simple, you don't have to be rich to be powerful. You just have to be brave enough to speak. If this story inspired you, subscribe and share it. Let it remind someone in your life that their voice matters, their dignity counts, and no one, no matter how powerful, can take that away.